really like Deftones. I've always admired how they've managed to mix in this shoegazy atmosphere in with their metal, you know, heaviness that I've always really appreciated. And I think the way that they've done it has always been super fresh, super unique, and not many bands out there can quite conjure up that kind of tone in the way that they do. There are plenty of other bands that do this out there, obviously, but I feel like Deftones have always managed to do it in such a way that gives off this huge amount of passion in their music. The vocals are always soaring, and then they can also be incredibly menacing at points too. And they're definitely one of the most successful bands in this area as well. Like, they've been super popular for years and years now. And they're extremely consistent too. I don't think you could really argue with ranking their albums in any particular order. I mean, a lot of people put White Pony at the top, but man, you could put Diamond Eyes at the top and it wouldn't really matter either. Or Saturday Night Wrist too. There is no real way to rank their albums. They're just incredibly consistent, and I respect that a lot. They're just such a great band. This new album here is totally adding to that for me. I think this is actually one of my favourite Deftones albums. There's a couple in their discography I've yet to hear, but out of the ones I've heard, and I think I've heard most of them at this point, this is definitely up there for me. I am really, really enjoying this. Just adding to the fact that they've been around for what, like coming up to 30 years at this point, and yet they are still killing it, man. The hook game on here is stellar. The vocals sound as fantastic as ever. My God, they just do not sound like they've aged one bit. So many bands that were popular in the 2000s in the heavy rock, hard rock, metal-ish scene, new metal even, sound like shit today. They did not age well, but Deftones have prevailed. Like, they have absolutely prevailed. They have shown that they stand above the rest and are still putting out fucking great music in 2020. I totally needed this album this year too. I just haven't got any albums in my favourites catalogue that sound anything like this, because Deftones are truly one of a kind. The opening track is classic for their discography. It just instantly sucks you back in. I've seen a lot of people even say that this is like on the level of White Pony days, and yeah, you know what, this actually does sound like it could fit in that era too. Yeah, sure, you could argue, well, it sounds like what they've already done in the past, but I just see it as them staying true to themselves and just nailing that sound, because when they get it right, my God, it comes out like this, and it's absolutely stellar. What an opening track. I find the lyrics to be super inspiring and uplifting as well, just a really positive spin on what you'd usually expect from Deftones. I feel like they're quite downtrodden at points, but this track just seems to have this hopeful energy to it, which I, again, really appreciate. I keep saying I really appreciate, but it just adds this new kind of tone to the track. You're kind of listening to it from a different angle, a different lens, and I am, again, just awe-inspired by how good this track is. Get to the more heavier tracks though, with Urantia, with the beefiest fucking riff. God damn, I think maybe Headless is against this track in terms of like the heaviest sounding tracks here, because Headless is sludgy as hell and menacing, absolutely just chilling to the bone. But Urantia too, the riff on this, my God, there are so many riffs, the chunky riffs that come through, I just love. Particularly with Urantia and a lot of tracks on this album, I just really like how the soft vocals offset the riff. Like, no matter how heavy they go, this man will just give you these wonderful vocals that sound like almost angelic at points, and yeah, it still works. You could have someone screaming over this track and it would probably make more sense than what Chino does here, but it works. It fucking works. Deftones make this work. There's lots and lots of angst and anger in The Link Is Dead. It almost seems like it's being fired towards perhaps political leaders or just the state of America at large. I don't really know, it's difficult to tell, but he does sound angry as hell on this track. I mean, man, he is just throwing in the most amount of teen angst you could imagine. Filled up with true hatred, he says here. Yeah, man, he just has a lot of fire in him, and it kind of like seems like he wants to just pile people together to make a huge amount of change on this one. I love the way on Radiant City and a few other tracks here as well, where the vocals are just incredibly like intense. They're just so intense. They go really screechy and he's just like screaming into the microphone, and then he kind of like completely switches it up with the more softer type of vocals. And again, these kinds of things on the same track seem to work really well. I've obviously been doing this for years, but I've actually never talked about Deftones on this channel ever, so I just kind of want to highlight how impressed I am every time that their tracks just have such a range. Like, there's a huge amount of range in one song. You've got the softer moments, you've got the heavy as hell moments, all just in this weird mix in one track, and yet they always manage to make it work. You're sucked into it because of the atmosphere they make here. They're so impressive. The atmosphere of something like a shoegaze album, you know, a classic type of shoegaze album, and then also classic metal elements too. They just have nailed it, man. They really have. It's impressive from, like, I guess, a musical study perspective, if you want to be a bit of a nerd, because these kinds of things have always been very separate, but bringing them together is how Deftones do it, and it's crazy, but it's great. I love the track Pompeji, definitely one of my favorites here. The Jesus Christ that he screams, he blasts out of nowhere is so fucking good. There are so many great out of nowhere moments with the choruses here. I just think every single chorus hits. Every chorus on this album hits. It just makes me more excited to dig more into this album with further listens and just learn all the words, because every chorus is a smasher, man. I just want to sing my heart out every time they hit one of these hooks. The lyrics themselves on this track are really interesting as well, reading into them, where it's from the perspectives of the citizens of Pompeji who died that day, you know, where Mount Vesuvius erupted. And, you know, it's a very famous story, I don't need to explain it, but he's kind of writing it from the perspective of the people that ended up, you know, suffering, which I find really interesting as well. I like tracks that go for this historical angle. I always get really interested in this type of stuff. Lots of bands that I'm interested in tend to do this, and some of my favorite tracks always lean into this, and I'm glad they made this track because it's really well written. And then you've got the closing track right at the end, which is just incredibly triumphant and spellbinding. Honestly, this is one of the best tracks, again, in terms of the way that it's just swirling with all of the fantastic sounds that come through. The band is so good. They're just so good. They're so fucking talented. And again, they just haven't aged a day. This is so far into their career, and they're putting out a career highlight here for me, I think. And I think Deftones fans are going to agree anyway. This is definitely one of their best. It just really is. It's not totally new for them, but it's just like them getting everything they've done before and just bringing it together to create something so fantastic, and that's what I appreciate. This is a great album. If I did have to pick like a minor critique, it would probably be Spell of Mathematics. I've seen people say this is one of the best tracks on the album. I totally don't agree with that. I find the last minute of the track just pretty whatever. It doesn't really interest me or engage me. I just don't think the pace of the song is there. It just feels a bit slow. Doesn't really hit when the chorus comes as well, which is something that this album does very well. But I feel like this track is the worst example of how good this album can be. That's just how I feel. Only really minor critique, because I think this album's great from start to finish anyway. For all those reasons, I'm gonna go an 8 out of 10. Definitely a big favourite for me of the year, one of the best albums for me I've heard all year. Definitely need to talk more about metal, I say this all the time. I know Deftones aren't strictly metal music, but, you know, listening to this just kind of gets me in the mood to listening to some like really chunky, heavy, bass heavy, guitar heavy bands, because there's a lot out there that I just need to lay my ears on. And yeah, Deftones, fantastic band. Hopefully you've checked this album out. Let me know your thoughts on this album as well. Tell me where you'd rank it in their discography. That would be a pretty interesting conversation to have. Thank you for watching this review. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you subscribe as well. Have a good day and goodbye.